Thank you. We had a little moment of peaceful music before the conversation we're about to have that may not be quite so peaceful. My name is Carol Silver Elliott. I'm president and CEO of the Jewish Home Family, and we're delighted to have Jonathan Ornstein here with us this afternoon. We had hoped when we began to plan this program that one of our local rabbis who had recently been to Ukraine would be able to join us, and unfortunately at the last minute that was not the case. But before we give Mr. Ornstein an opportunity to speak with us, I thought it might be appropriate for us to each just take a moment of silent reflection to think about the plight of those individuals who are still in Ukraine, as well as the incredible work that's being done by Mr. Ornstein and his organization. So let's just take a brief moment, please. Thank you. I will say right at the outset that we will have opportunities at the end of the presentation for questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A so we can screen them and go through them and make sure that they get addressed properly. And if you have any other issues, you can certainly put it in the chat, but ideally questions will go in the Q&A box. We've been talking, the world is talking about what's happening in Ukraine, and certainly our elders across the Jewish Home Family have been very focused. We've had prayer services on both campuses. We're talking about the news and following the news, but certainly we have an individual with us today who's much closer to what's really going on than any of us have been. I want to introduce Jonathan Ornstein. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the JCC in Krakow. And I actually met you in the fall of 2008 when I was on a Federation mission from Cincinnati. So it's like I was in that building way back. Since its opening in April 2008 by the Prince of Wales, Jonathan has served as the Chief Executive Officer of the Jewish Community Center of Krakow, Poland, an organization devoted to rebuilding Jewish life in Krakow. The JCC boasts over 750 Jewish members, welcomes 10,000 visitors a month, and has become one of Poland's most visible signs of Jewish revival. He created Ride for the Living and Holocaust Survivor Day, two global initiatives with tens of thousands of participants. Prior to the JCC's opening in 2008, he lectured in modern Hebrew at Krakow's Jagiellonian University Department of Jewish Studies for 6 years and founded the Gesher Association for Polish-Israeli Dialogue. A native of New York City, Jonathan moved to Israel in 1994, living for 7 years on a kibbutz in the Negev desert, and served in a combat unit in the I.D.F. before moving to Poland in 2001. He's a founding member of the Krakow Association of Christians and Jews, where he serves as vice president. He also serves on the boards of the Krakow branch of the Child Survivors of the Holocaust Organization, Hillel Poland, JCC Global, and the Abraham Global Peace Initiative. Jonathan, a primary architect of Poland's contemporary Jewish rebirth, is a frequent international speaker and media contributor on issues relating to Jewish Poland, as well as being an activist for Holocaust survivors. And of course, we know how profoundly you've been involved in what's happening in Ukraine. So I'm going to give you the floor and ask you to just tell us about what you're seeing and what you're experiencing.
Sure. Thank you, Carol. Nice to see you again. I hope it won't take us 14 years to see each other again. Thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be able to speak with you tonight. Tonight for me, this afternoon for you. Here it's about 10 o'clock, but fear not, I'm always up late, so this is okay for me. I don't sleep very much. I also have a 4-month-old baby, so whatever little sleep I was getting before has vanished, and it's even less. So I want to talk to you about what we're doing in Ukraine, but I thought maybe just give you a little bit of information about our JCC. You touched on a few of those things in the introduction about what we're doing, but I think it's not it's not necessarily so obvious to everybody what a Jewish community center is doing in Poland, in Krakow, which is near Auschwitz. So maybe just a few minutes to give the background about who we are as an institution. And I think also that helps to, at least from my opinion, show why we have reacted in the way that we have reacted, because I think it's very much informed and influenced by our community's history, and where we are. So I'm sure you all know that Poland was not only a place of tragedy, but a place of Jewish life for 1,000 years, almost 1,000 years. And Poland, at the eve of World War II, in 1939, Poland had 3.5 million Jews. Poland was 10% Jewish. The United States today is about 1.5% Jewish. So cities in Poland like Warsaw and Krakow and Lublin and Białystok were very, very Jewish places, some of them even more than 50% Jewish. In 1939, 60% of the lawyers and 40% of the doctors in Poland were Jewish. I tell you this just because we often think of the Jews as being completely separate, not being part of mainstream Polish society, but they were very much part of mainstream Polish society and made up a good chunk of the middle class. So you had Jews living in Poland for about 1,000 years, good times and bad times. In 1939, the Nazis, Germany invades from one side, and the Soviet Union 16 days later invades from the other side. Poland is occupied for 5.5 years. And by the end of World War II, the end of the Holocaust, over 90% of Polish Jews have been murdered. Now, usually for us, in a Jewish perspective, that's about, when we think about Poland, that's the end of Jewish life in Poland. We know there were survivors. We know they came to all these communities around the world, to New York, New Jersey, Israel, the UK, South America, Cuba. Survivors went wherever they could and somehow rebuilt their lives, and I think are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and amazing what they've been able to do, most of them. So the story of Jewish Poland leaves Poland at that point in our general narrative, but it's a mistake to see it that way only, because not all the Jews left Poland. Some of the Jews, these Holocaust survivors and their families, for all different reasons, stayed in Poland during communism, and at a certain point went underground. There was anti-Semitism in Poland even during communism, and it wasn't safe and easy to be openly Jewish. So some of the Jews, many of the Jews that remained, chose to change their names, and they even hid their identities from their own families. So by 1989, when communism ended in Poland quite suddenly, there was really not much Jewish life going on to speak of. And in the last now 33 years, since communism ended, since the system changed and we have democracy in Poland once again, in these past 33 years, two very interesting things have happened. One is that Polish non-Jews have become very interested in everything Jewish. Polish non-Jews, if you think about it, had been living in Poland. Jews and non-Jews have been living together in Poland for 1,000 years, and those were good times and bad times. It's important to point out that the Holocaust happened, so much of the Holocaust happened in Poland because that's where the Jews were. The Nazis built the camps where the Jews were, which is not the Germans, nothing if not efficient. So the camps, so many of the camps were built in Poland. But why? Because the Jews were there. But why were the Jews there? The Jews were in Poland because they were welcome in Poland when they were kicked out of other countries. So this history of 1,000 years is not only darkness and tragedy, and not only the Holocaust and pogroms. There's a lot of good in there as well. Ups and downs for 1,000 years. Complicated Jewish-Polish intertwined history. And now, since 1989, these Polish non-Jews have become very interested in this part of their heritage that was ripped out of the country. 1939, the Jews were started to be murdered and subjugated, under Nazi and then Soviet rule. And then for the next 50 years, the Holocaust and the aftermath of the Holocaust, nobody really spoke too much about the Jews and the suffering of the Jews. So you had no closure. You had the Holocaust, you had World War II, you had communism, and during this communist period where in other parts of the world you had a questioning and a reckoning about what happened during the war and during the Holocaust, you didn't have that really in Poland. So since 1989, Polish non-Jews have been fascinated on many, many levels with everything Jewish. That means Jewish studies departments at universities. It means museums, Jewish museums run by non-Jews. It means klezmer music becoming very popular. It means, in the case of Krakow, the largest Jewish culture festival in the world is in Krakow, Poland, started by two non-Jews, one of whom is still running it. Now, we might think the largest Jewish culture festival in the world should be in Teaneck or Brooklyn or the Upper West Side. But the largest Jewish culture festival in the world is in Krakow, with one of these non-Jewish founders still running it. So something very profound and happening in Poland, a place that we usually identify as a place defined in many ways by anti-Semitism, is a place where non-Jews are very interested in Jewish life, Jewish culture, Jewish history, and that has led to the second really interesting thing which is happening, which is what our JCC is focused on. And that second part is young people, young Poles are finding out that they have Jewish roots. Young Poles that grew up without knowing about their family history. So you have the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren now of Polish Holocaust survivors who stayed in Poland, and as I said earlier, who changed their names during communism to avoid anti-Semitism. Their descendants are now finding out that they're Jewish. And we're trying to welcome them back into the Jewish people. So they're finding out they're Jewish. And what's, I think, key here is that they're finding out they're Jewish in an environment that's conducive to being Jewish. If Poland was just full of anti-Semitism and very dangerous place to be Jewish today, and if you wore a kippah, you were subject to to threats and to harm, then a lot of these young Poles who are finding out they're Jewish would not act upon it. But we see dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of young Poles are finding out that they're Jewish and choosing to reconnect and rejoin the Jewish world. My wife included. I met my wife at the JCC. She grew up without knowing she was Jewish. She found out in her 20s she was Jewish and came to a Hanukkah party, and we met at the JCC. So this is happening in great numbers. It not only affects me professionally, but affects me personally. And if you think about it, we talk so much, we're so focused on the Holocaust as the Jewish people, rightfully so. And there's a frustration, I think, that we all feel, I'm sure we all do, that we can't do anything about the Holocaust. I mean, we can learn about it, we can study about the Holocaust, we can learn its lessons, which I think are to try to ensure it doesn't happen to us or anyone else again. But we can't change the outcome of the Holocaust. We can't go back in time and save people. We can't tell our great grandparents and their brothers and siblings and all of these people and people that we know, we can't tell them to leave Europe. We can't bomb the train tracks. Things that weren't done can't be done. And what was done can't be undone. We can't save any of the 6 million Jews. But we do have an opportunity to reach out to the descendants of the Jews who were cut off from the Jewish world. They weren't victims of the Holocaust, they weren't in the camps, but they were cut off from their identity. And we, as the Jewish Community Center in Krakow, and I think we as the Jewish people, have a responsibility, an opportunity and a responsibility. And I think there's very little space in between the idea of opportunity and responsibility, because we have the opportunity, we have the responsibility to reach out and to try to bring these people back into the fold and at least give them the opportunity to rejoin the Jewish world, something that they were cut off from because of the Holocaust and because of 50 years of communism. So that's what our center is focused on. We were founded to take care of survivors, and that's still a primary mission. We have 50 Holocaust survivors that we are taking care of. There's no federation in Krakow. There's no Jewish Family Services. That's us taking care. And during COVID, that meant they have dedicated space in the building. And during the 2 years of COVID, it meant doing all the shopping twice a week for all our Holocaust survivors. But we are also a forward-looking institution. We opened a preschool, which is the first Jewish preschool to open in Krakow since the Holocaust. We have a Sunday school. We have BBYO, the teen program. Hillel, the student club, is run through our JCC. Shabbat dinners every week. We celebrate all Jewish holidays. We have hundreds of people learning Hebrew and Yiddish and Arabic. We have lots and lots going on in our center, and have really become a focal point, a hub of the rebirth of Jewish life. And all of that, what was going on, we were founded in 2008, and Carol was there visiting us right after we opened, the first few months. So the first 13 years of 10 months of our existence were doing all of those things that I told you about. And I should mention, it's Jews and non-Jews working together. Our JCC, normal times, has about 70 non-Jewish volunteers who are working with us to rebuild Jewish life. So it's really Jews and non-Jews working together to help rebuild the Jewish community that was once very strong and recently has seen hard times because of the Holocaust and because of communism. So that's what we were doing until February 24th. On February 24th, Russia invaded Ukraine, and our lives all changed very much. We are in Krakow. We are an hour's drive from Auschwitz, but we are about a 2.5 hour drive from the Ukrainian border. And we understood that our city of Krakow was going to be a major destination for Ukrainian refugees, Ukrainians leaving war. So we made a few decisions very early on. That first couple of days, we made a few decisions. First thing we did is we took a huge banner. We painted a big banner in the blue and yellow colors that we've all become familiar with of the Ukrainian flag. And we wrote in Ukrainian, "Welcome." We wanted to show the Ukrainians coming to our city that they're welcome in our city and in our center. And we started to collect food and clothing and different items, and people started to bring them in. And that's how that was the beginning of our relief effort. But once we put up that banner, but we made two, I think, decisions that have guided us since day one, and we're I think 103 days into this war, something like that at this point. The first decision that we made was that we were going to do everything we can to help Ukraine. Not what we were going to do what was convenient, not what we were going to do what fits in our budget, or, if we have any extra money for something, we're going to use it. No, we made a decision that we were going to fully focus our efforts and do everything we could to help Ukraine. That was one. And the second decision that continues to guide us, is we made a decision that we were going to help Jews and non-Jews equally. So helping Jews and non-Jews sometimes sounds good, but it can mean that you set up a system to help Jews, and if the occasional non-Jew finds his way in, you help him or her as well. But we made a different decision, and we said that in a community like ours, which was decimated 80 years ago during the Holocaust, in a community that was decimated because the world stood silent while we were victims, we, hopefully having learned the lesson of the Holocaust, or one of the lessons of the Holocaust, not to be indifferent, must not stand silent when others are being victimized. So of course we'll help Jews. We care about Jews. We're a Jewish community center, but we are going to make a particular effort to help everybody and not only Jews. And that's been our mantra since we opened, since we started helping Ukraine, since the war started at the end of February. And since then, I can give you just some numbers. We've helped over 75,000 Ukrainians directly. We are housing at this point over 400 people a night. It's almost all women and children. The men between 18 and 65 are not allowed out of the country. So you really have almost all women and children. For the past months, we've been housing in hotel rooms that we're paying for. We have about 150 hotel rooms, along with a few apartments and a large facility outside of the city that we have 80 women and children living in. So we're housing about over 400 people a day. we've set up the initial response in our center of collecting food and collecting clothing, toys, sanitary supplies, hygienic supplies. That has become a free shop, a place where people, these refugees come in, about 500-600 every day, 7 days a week, come in, take whatever they need for free. And we're feeding, we have a couple other programs in Krakow that we're feeding. Altogether, about 1,000 people a day are dependent on us for to be fed. This is a vulnerable population. They've been through war. It's women and children. Many of them have even suffered from sexual violence. And therapy, psychological, psychosocial support is a big part of what we do as well. We have multiple programs to provide psychosocial support to these women. We have a safe space for women where they can learn Polish, learn English, get some job training, get psychological support. We have a daycare that we've set up. We have legal training that we're doing. And we continue in the beginning when there was still a lot of people stuck at the border trying to come into Poland. We set up tents on the Ukrainian side of the border with soup, with food, with medical care that we could help these people that were sometimes waiting 48, 72 hours, having had spent days in their cars and were now stuck at a border. It was very cold in February, very difficult situation. So we help people at the border. That situation has mostly been alleviated. It's quieted down at the border, but we're still sending supplies into Ukraine. Today, we raised some money and we're able to send medical supplies into a hospital into Ukraine that we've done that before to different hospitals. We're sending food deep into Ukraine in the Zaporozhye region, which is very close to the front lines with the Russians. We've sent truckloads and truckloads of supplies, food, medical supplies, whatever is needed, all different supplies we've been able to raise the money for and send into Ukraine. We've hired we've doubled in size within a month. We had doubled the size of our institution, and I've hired 25 people full time to work on this Ukraine project. It's not enough to just put people in a hotel room and give them a place to sleep. We need to keep an eye on them to make sure they're okay. Some of them, have children in there with special needs. Very, very difficult situation. We have social workers that we've hired. We have programs to train Polish and Russian and Ukrainian speaking psychologists in trauma therapy. So really we really turned our institution. And again, we had no idea how to do this. This is not something any of us were trained for, but we've turned our institution over the last few months into a full-scale humanitarian aid operation. And I'm very mindful of where we are. The fact that our community center is down the road from Auschwitz, and the fact, as I said earlier, that our community was decimated. All that we're doing on a daily basis to rebuild Jewish life, we're doing because people didn't care about us. And when we have the opportunity now, 80 years later, to try to care for others, I think we have no question that we absolutely have this not only responsibility to do it, but it's a privilege to be in this position. That once when we were the victims, and now we're able to be in a position to take care of these Ukrainians. So we've helped Holocaust survivors. We've helped many older people that have had much difficulty to leave Ukraine, and brought them out from very deep into Ukraine and set up different transportation and are housing them in Krakow. And we've helped Ukrainian Holocaust survivors get to America, and are working in many, many different areas. If people if we can help them travel onward and to go somewhere else, then we do help them. And if they need to stay in Krakow, then we try to help them as best we can. Just to give you a sense of the scale, Krakow is a city of about 750,000 population, and there are 150,000 refugees. So about 20% of the city now increased the size of the city by 20%. And of those 150,000, the city of Krakow itself, the municipality, is housing about 10,000. So 140,000 out of the 150,000 are being housed by organizations like ours or by individuals. The Polish people have been remarkable, really been amazing in terms of opening their hearts, opening their homes to Ukrainians. We have in our community a single mom. She lives in a 3-bedroom house, and she had at one point 23 Ukrainians living with her in her house. So it's really been a remarkable effort among Polish society to welcome these Ukrainians in. It's been very surprising to me. I wouldn't have thought that Poland would respond the way that it has, but it's been really something quite beautiful. And the backdrop of all the work that we're doing is a Polish society that is doing everything that it can to help Ukraine. So with that, I will stop and hopefully be able to answer your questions if you have any.
Thank you so much. It's extraordinary to hear the way that your organization has responded to these dire circumstances, and indeed the way the entire city has responded to these circumstances. I'm curious because our world is elderly. Can you tell us what's going on with elderly in Ukraine? I know early on I had attended one of the briefings, and there were a lot of older folks who were not going to be able to be evacuated. Do you have any insights into that, Jonathan?
Yeah, so that many of them, you're right, many of them haven't been evacuated. The situation is stabilized in many places. So really, when we talk about Ukraine, it depends where we're talking about. Right? It's almost like if we think about in the United States, if a hurricane hits Florida, then the question is, how are things in Florida, not how are things in, in Minnesota. So Ukraine is a big country, not as big as the United States, but still things have stabilized, and the fighting is in a few places. And where the fighting is, close to the fighting, it's a difficult situation. Organizations are still trying to get supplies in, especially to elderly people, also people that are disabled, those with mobility issues, those who chose not to leave are there, but are being cared for. Cities like Kiev, like Lviv, we say in Polish Lvov, have supplies, so they're doing okay. The country is, there's a lot of goods flowing into the country. So while we are focused for the most part on people in our city, young and old, there are, right to say that many older people haven't left. Of the people that have left, most of them were not elderly. So the elderly are in greater concentration still in Ukraine, and there's a tremendous amount of good work being done by Jewish organizations, by non-Jewish organizations, to make sure that people receive whatever they need. For the most part, where that's the most acute need right now is places close to the fighting. So in the east, near Zaporozhye region, we're working now to send supplies in to a population that's a mostly elderly population that is in great need of all the supply of everything at this point, and is close to the front lines. I think you're muted, Carol.
That's probably the most frequent line I've used over the last 2.5 years. Sorry. One of the questions that someone submitted was asking whether you have been targeted, your organization has been targeted at all by sort of Russian bad actors, if you will. Have you experienced any of that?
Not yet. Not yet. I shouldn't be negative about it. No, we haven't, and I hope that will stay the same. I think the Russians probably have plenty of targets, and maybe we're a little bit under the radar in terms of what we're doing, but you never know.
I hope you stay there. Another question that of course is on everybody's minds: what can we do to help?
I think a few things. One is that any supplies that are going into Ukraine, the best is to purchase them in countries, in places outside, right around Ukraine. So, people, I don't know, I got a huge package today of like soap and shampoo, which is really not so necessary. There's everything. We have everything here in Poland and countries like Poland. So really the best thing is if people can support financially, or organizations that are sending supplies into Ukraine is important. Besides that, I would say keep up the pressure. So, if people are paying more for gas now, and part of that is because of not importing so much gas from Russia, then we should not complain about that, and support our lawmakers who are behind that, and try to keep the pressure up on Russia. I think one of the only ways that this is going to stop is if Russia feels it economically, and as much as we can do to show that, you know, we're not just a decadent West that folds when things get a little difficult for us, then I think that would be tremendously supportive, especially now after a few months. You know, people get tired of stories. No story lasts forever, and we see that it's not leading the news as much as it was a month ago and certainly 2 months ago. So I think keep the pressure up and continue to care about what's happening in Ukraine, and continue to lobby your representatives to focus on Ukraine, and to reward representatives that send money to Ukraine, that help the US continue to do that. But a lot of it, people always say besides money, but a lot of it does come down to money. And whether it's helping people in Poland or sending supplies into Ukraine, those things cost money.
Absolutely. I'm curious, and maybe you would share with us a little bit of your journey. Here you grew up in New York, and you obviously made some choices along the way that led you to make your home in Poland. Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I grew up in New York City, in Queens, and after college was starting law school, and I wasn't sure that was for me. So I thought I'd try to defer, give it a try for a year. And if they said no, at least I tried. Then they said yes. I guess they weren't too eager to have me in the first place. So I decided to go to Israel for the year, go someplace warmer, go spend some time on the beach. And I got to Israel, and I fell in love with Israel, and I decided to make Aliyah. And I was living on a kibbutz near Eilat in the desert, and I joined the army. I became a lone soldier, and I spent a couple of years in the army. And then I was back on the kibbutz, and I met a Polish woman, different one, not the one that I mentioned who I married, earlier Polish woman. And I decided to move back to Poland to be with her. And I came to Krakow. She was from Łódź, which if you say to Jews, they never know what Łódź is. And then you say Lodz, and they go, oh, Lodz. My grandparents are from Lodz. It was a very Jewish place before the war. So I lived there, and then got a job in Krakow teaching at the university. So we moved here, and it didn't work out with her. We never got married. We just broke up, and I fell in love with Krakow and was teaching Hebrew at the university. And they were building the JCC, and I somehow got the job. The story building the JCC is actually also an interesting story, because we were founded by the Prince of Wales, by Prince Charles. And the story is that he was 20 years ago, in 2002, he was in Krakow on an official visit. And as part of this official visit, he met with some Holocaust survivors in our community. And he was moved by their stories, and he asked how he could help. And they said that they have all these synagogues, they have a place that they can pray, but they don't have a senior citizen center, a place to be together. And he promised he would help them realize their goal. And he went back to England and got in touch with an organization called World Jewish Relief, which was the organizer of the Kinder transport during the war. And they took a look at Krakow, and they realized it wasn't only this older community that the prince had connected with, that there were young people, as I mentioned, like my wife, like many others, were starting to find out about their Jewish roots. So they went back to the prince, and they said, instead of doing only a senior citizen center, let's have the senior citizen center, the senior element, be the centerpiece of our JCC, but let's do something, hopefully larger. And the prince said, okay. And they were able to raise the money in the UK. And on April 29th, 2008, Prince Charles and Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall, came to Krakow and spent the day with us and opened our JCC. So it's a very unique creation story.
It really is a wonderful story. I remember hearing it all those years ago when I was there. I was on a Federation trip that went to Poland and then to Israel, and my father was actually born in Poland and was fortunate enough that his mother saw the writing on the wall and said, I'm taking my kids and I'm leaving. But I remember being struck by some of the kinds of stories that you're telling us about people who were discovering their roots I remember particularly we met with the chief rabbi of Poland, who told us a story about having just conducted a bar mitzvah for a young boy. And the child's parents, when they had gotten together, fallen in love, they were both what he called skinheads.
Yeah.
One of them, the grandmother said, I have to tell you something. She said to the young man, you know, you're Jewish. And he goes to his fiance and he says, oh my gosh, I'm Jewish. And so she goes to her grandmother. She's devastated. And the grandmother says, newsflash, you're Jewish too.
Right.
And he talked about the difficulty the families had in accepting all of that. So what a wonderful thing that your JCC is there and helping provide not just a safe place, but an open place for people within Poland who are discovering their identities, but also people who are coming to you from the terrible difficulties in Ukraine. I thank you so much for being with us today. We don't have any additional questions right now. I know it's late at night there, and you have a little one who's probably not giving you much sleep as it is. But thank you so much. And I do hope if you come to visit New York, you'll make a side trip to northern New Jersey and visit us as well.
I would love to. I have many, many friends all there in Bergen County area, and I would absolutely love the JCC. The Tenafly JCC is a place very close to, and yeah, I would love to. Be my pleasure.
Thank you again so very much. And thank you everyone for listening today. Be well.
Thank you so much. Be well, everyone.